Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their amazing stories of experience, strength, and hope. My guest on today's show, Patrice T, has experienced the disease of alcoholism and the gifts of sobriety, both as a child of an alcoholic and later as the alcoholic herself. At one point, her own alcoholism overlapped her father's struggle with the disease until she, too, found sobriety. Her story is fraught with the strife of her father's alcoholism through her early childhood and adolescence. Like many of us, she started drinking as a teenager, despite what she saw in her own home. Drinking brought both relief and release to Patrice's increasingly chaotic life. By the time she was practicing nursing in her early 20s, her alcohol use had morphed from an enjoyable pastime to a daily and seemingly unbreakable habit. By this time, Patrice's father had entered the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. While her father's life in AA was steadily improving, Patrice's life was rapidly deteriorating. And even though she knew her father's life was getting better, and he sometimes subtly shared his positivity about AA, Patrice simply wasn't ready to quit. It took hitting bottom for her to admit she was licked. She was finally ready to stop drinking and joined AA. That was 43 years ago. Over the 4 decades, she has enjoyed sharing the blessings of a sober life with her father, who died with 32 years of sobriety through AA recovery. Patrice's sobriety is firmly rooted in the center of AA. Her involvement in meetings, sponsorship, and all varieties of service have led to a full and meaningful life. The grave challenges she has endured and overcome are strong testimony to the kind of healing found only in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Her willingness to carry the message and to reach out to other women speaks to the commitment she learned early and still practices to this day. I've gotten to know Patrice over the past few years and am most impressed with her approach to working the program. I think you'll find her tale of long-term sobriety to be both inspiring and enthralling. So, put the world on hold for the next hour and 10 minutes while you enjoy this episode of AA Recovery Interviews with my friend and AA sister, Patrice T.
My name is Patrice. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Patrice. So glad to have you here on AA Recovery Interviews.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you can do this today. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last couple of years during the Zoom meetings, and I want to thank you for being so friendly and accepting and inviting to me when I first came into that meeting. And it's really good to see you today.
You too.
So I've heard you share in meetings, but I know you've got a lot of time, but I wasn't quite sure what your sobriety date is.
My sobriety date is January 9th, 1979. So I have 43 years.
January seems to be a popular month for people to get sober.
January is a big month for people. They hit bottom, but it takes them a week or two to come in.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it?
Recruitment. We call it recruitment month for AA.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. People doing their resolutions. I came in on the 1st, but it wasn't a resolution. It would just happen to work out that way. My last drunk was on New Year's Eve. So what was going on in early part of January of 1979 that made you want to go to AA?
Well, I had been suffering from a eating disorder also. Mm-hmm. And in April of 78, I went to a Overeaters Anonymous meeting. And I remember that summer feeling of, okay, I think I can control and enjoy my drinking. And in September, I remember saying to a friend of mine, I feel that dark cloud coming over me. And of course, she's not alcoholic. I've known her since I was 7. And she said, what are you talking about? And I just said, I just feel that dark cloud. And, I just started to hit that bottom again. And I was arrested for drunk driving in October. And I was working as a nurse and doing private duty at the time. And I just felt like my life was falling apart. I became friends with a gal who lives in Boston, and she would give me these self-help books and feel good about yourself book. And I still have one of the books she gave me, and she said, you're such a beautiful person, but I didn't feel that way at all. And I remember her saying to me, why don't you come to church? And I was raised Catholic and, 12 years of Catholic training. And I started going to church and, she had been reading the Bible. She said, why don't you, start reading the Bible? And I hit the spiritual bottom.
Mm-hmm.
I started reading and I started praying and I started just feeling that hopelessness. And right before January 9th, on January 8th, I decided I'm going to go back to an OA meeting because I woke up that weekend and I thought, my life is never going to change.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to continue going on this way. And I just didn't know how to do life. I didn't know how to function. I didn't know how to take care of myself. Simple things like having insurance, doing things like a normal person would do, having a job that you stay at. I couldn't seem to stay at a job. And I just hit that spiritual bottom. I felt hopeless and helpless.
Was that with your, the OA?
No, it was both because I was going to be starting drunk driving school that week.
Uh-huh.
And January 8th was a Monday. And I went to this meeting and it was a newcomers meeting. They told me to get a big book and get a 12 and 12 and get a directory and get a food plan and, and find someone that you can call. And I asked this girl, can I call you? And she said, yeah. And she said, call me when you get home.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got home, I poured my Almaden white Chablis and I lit my joint. And I called her and I said, on this food plan, it says that you can't drink for 30 days, but you can have fruit in between meals. I'm wondering, instead of having fruit in between meals, can I drink? Can I have, wine at night? And she said, are you an alcoholic? And I said, no, but my father is. He's sober in AA for about 3.5 years. And, we talked more and she said, are you drinking right now? I said, yes. And then I finally told her that I'm going to drunk driving school the next day. And she said to me, why don't you meet me at an AA meeting tomorrow night, Tuesday night? It was a big meeting, young people's meeting in Los Angeles. And I remember going and it was huge meeting, 300-400 people.
Mm-hmm.
So many young people, so many good-looking young people, happy. That's the thing that hit me because I had gone to meetings with my father when he got sober in 75 because he asked me to. I thought it was because he wanted me to support him. I didn't know that he was trying to 12-step me. But I did go to this meeting and I did, I saw people happy and I just remember thinking, I haven't really been happy. I've acted as if my whole life. I've always tried to be something other than myself. And I acted as if my whole life. And I just cried during the whole thing. And above the podium in this church, they have this stained glass window and it says, God is love. And I just remember feeling at home. I wanted what these people had. I wasn't sure I was an alcoholic because I compared myself with my father. I was more of a periodic alcoholic. But when I did my first step a few times in the first 5 years, there is no doubt that I'm an alcoholic.
Now, did you identify with the eating addiction before you identified with the alcoholism and drug addiction?
Yes.
I've had other guests on the show who have had the eating addictions along with the alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever, and most of them were an outgrowth of something, the type of environment in which they were raised. How does your story factor into your becoming an alcoholic and having the problem with the eating addictions?
Honestly, I think that I was born an alcoholic and an addict. Some of my siblings are not alcoholics and addicts. They may have suffered from the disease of alcoholism in our family because of my father, but they don't feel the way that I feel. And I have felt that way from early on in my childhood. I don't feel like other people. I want to be like other people. I don't want to be like myself. I didn't fit in. I always tried to fit in with people. And, I always sugar and overeating was big. And it was when I was 13 that we went to a dance. And my family of origin, my father was an alcoholic, bad alcoholic. And he had stopped drinking when I was about 5. But I remember sitting on his lap and he was jumping me up and down. I must have been 4 or 5 years old. And I said to him, "Daddy, you're drunk." And I remember looking at my mother, and my mother just looked at me with like, "Oh my God, you said the wrong thing. Why did you do that?" And that just, stayed with me for many years, that whatever I would say, it was the wrong thing. I could never say the right thing.
So did you have to tiptoe around that in the house?
Absolutely. And then right at that point, my dad stopped drinking. And he's not sober in AA, but he stopped drinking for 7 years. But he was sort of a rageaholic, and there was physical hitting. And so, I loved him, but I was afraid of him. But at least we had some semblance of normalcy during those 7 years.
Where are you amongst your siblings? Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I'm one of 6. I'm third. And the first 3 were each a year apart. And then after me, there's 5 years, and then 10 years, and then 16 years. So it's almost like there were 2 separate families, because my brother and sister, who are older than me, we remember growing up in New York City. We lived in Washington Heights and play at the park across the street. I can remember running around. And but then we moved to New Jersey, grew up in this small town in New Jersey. During that time, we had some semblance of normal. We went to church as a family. We took vacations as a family. We sat down on Sunday dinner as a family. And all of a sudden, when I was about 11 or 12, my father started drinking. A lot of that stopped. We used to say the rosary on Sunday nights. I mean, we were really Irish Catholic. My grandparents were all from Ireland, so we used to listen to the Irish music on Sunday nights from Ireland. But it seemed everything falling apart when my father started drinking, and, we could hear the troubles. My mother complaining about his drinking and his gambling, running the numbers in New York. I don't even know what that means, but it's running the numbers.
Was he a rager before he started drinking?
Well, he started drinking when he was 11, and he stopped drinking when I was about 4 or 5.
Okay, so in the ensuing 7 years, was he raging while he was not drinking?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was. I always remember my sister and I were fighting over the pogo stick, and his solution was just to break the pogo stick over the sidewalk. Okay, now no one has the pogo stick. So, and even when I was very young, my father used to say when I was a baby, they used to have to protect me because my sister was a year and a few months older than me, and my brother was 2 years and a half older than me. And they just didn't like me. They weren't happy that I was there. And so my mother used to have to take me everywhere. And there's a part of me that always felt that I was never liked. My brother and sister never liked me. They did not want me to be there. And but my father's drinking was, such a problem that he had to stop or he was just going to lose everything. And he started drinking when I was maybe 11 or 12. And I remember he had a back surgery, and we went to go visit him. And he asked me to get something from the bedside table, and I opened the drawer, and there was a bottle of whiskey in there. And I remember thinking, oh, my God, this is bad.
On top of everything he was getting for the pain and whatever else he was getting in the hospital, he was also drinking.
Well, and he wasn't an addict. He wasn't a big pain pill person. He was a true alcoholic, wino. He would say to me, sometimes we go in the city to go to a meeting together whenever I would come home, and he would say, Pat, sometimes I look at those parks and I think, gee, it would be nice to be back with the winos. And he would just say, sometimes There's a part of every alcoholic that thinks,
There's that romantic Ernest Hemingway feeling, isn't there?
yeah, there is. There is. But, those days are gone. Those days were gone, and I knew it. I remember I went to meetings. First thing I heard, there were a few things that I heard in my first meeting. If you drank every day, then you need to go to a meeting every day. That was number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is take care of your alcoholism, and everything else will take care of itself. Because when you come in, you're like, I'm a mess. I don't have a life. I'm working, but I'm not even a good nurse. I'm a piece of shit. Like, you come in with all these problems, and as newcomers do. But they told me to just take care of my alcoholism, and all these problems would take care of itself. I didn't understand that at first. I do now, and it took me a while. But when I had 15 days, I went to the same meeting, and we went out for coffee, for fellowship, we used to call it, after the meeting. And I called him from the payphone in this diner. So it had to be 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, my dad's time. And I called him, and when I moved away, my father was a year and 4 or 5 months sober. And he had been taking me to meetings. But he would say, I'm going to take a 30-day trip. Would you come to the meeting with me? Yes, Daddy, I will. I'm going to take a 60-day trip. Would you come to the meeting with me? Yes, I will. Now, he didn't ask anyone else in the family. He only asked me, but I thought it was because I was his favorite. And when I left to go to California in 1976, he got sober May of 75. He gave me this plaque, and I have it right over there. And it's a Serenity Prayer plaque. It has the praying hands on it, and then it has the Serenity Prayer. And on the back of it, he wrote, remember, Daddy, this too shall pass. And he said to me, one day you're going to know what that means. And of course, I said, when my dad got sober, he got good, like all of us do. And, like it says in the family afterward, you don't want to become such a spiritual giant that you forget what your family has been through. And when the phone would ring, we would say, God, it's for you. Because my father had become this like spiritual giant, But he gave me this plaque, and he said, one day you're going to know what that means. So when I called him at 15 days sober, I said, Daddy, I have 15 days sober. I've been going to meetings. And he said to me, so you know what that plaque means then, right? And I said, yeah.
15 days in. And so he was still back on the East Coast while you were on the West Coast at that time?
Yeah.
So how old were you when you made that call to him?
23.
Between the ages of, let's say, whenever your dad first got sober and when you got sober, what did that period of time look like for you?
Well, my father got sober when I was 19, and I was, and in high school, I was very active in high school. I was a cheerleader. I was most athletic. I was captain of the softball team and this team. And, I was in plays, but I drank on the weekends. Whenever we would go out and we'd go to a party or we'd go to a dance, we drank, and we drank to excess. I drank to excess. I never drank to have fun. I drank to get screwed up. I was in nursing school those 2 years that my father's drinking was the worst. When I had to bring him to the emergency room where I worked with these people, and he was such a bad drunk, and he had cut himself, and I had to bring him in, and this is my dad, he's screaming, he's just like the alcoholic, and I was in nursing school. We were in our last semester, and we were studying the social diseases. The social diseases back then were gonorrhea, syphilis, and alcoholism.
Yeah.
And they brought someone in from AA to speak, and I had never heard of AA and didn't know anything about AA. But I knew my father was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
From the time I was 4 or 5. And I went up to this guy after the meeting, and I can picture it like it was yesterday and so clearly. And I went up to him and I said, can I have some of these pamphlets? My father's a bad alcoholic. Now, I was doing a lot of drugs, drinking a lot, and I was having consequences. I would I would be brought home. I remember one time I made the paper in Paramus, New Jersey. I hit the curb, tore up 20 feet of lawn, and killed 3 garbage cans. And when the police stopped me, I'd had a flat tire, and they said, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, I had a flat tire and it just went out of control." But I was drunk, but my brother was a policeman in the town next door. And I said, "My brother's a policeman in New Milford, New Jersey." Mm-hmm. And they said, "Well, we'll take you home." And so they took me home, and, I was grounded and I couldn't drive, only to school and back and blah, blah, blah. But what happened that night when I got these pamphlets, mm-hmm. I thought, I'm going to go home and bring these to my dad. At the same time, my father is on a bus coming home from New York City because he worked in the city. And he runs into a friend of his, Pat, who became his first sponsor. And Pat looked at him, and my father looked terrible. And Pat said to him, "Bill, are you ready?" And my father said yes. And so when I got home with my little pamphlets, I came in the front door, and there were about 3 or 4 guys sitting around the kitchen table, 12-stepping my father into Alcoholics Anonymous.
What a God moment.
I don't even know if I gave him those pamphlets, because my mother said to me, "These guys are here to help Daddy, and can you go study at your friend's house, which is around the block?" I said, "Yeah." But my father started going to AA at this point. And, he had a sponsor, and, he eventually died with 32 years of sobriety. Mm-hmm. The line was around the block.
Yeah, I can imagine.
For people to thank him, because he helped so many people. And he was of service at 33 days of sobriety. He was of service, He was always really active in northern New Jersey, Alcoholics Anonymous.
So his drinking, his active alcoholism, and your active alcoholism overlapped for about 4 years, was it?
Yeah, he got sober when I was 19, and I came in when I was 23. And during his first year, he would ask me to come to meetings with him, because he was going to take a 30-day or 60-day and 90-day. They pin you at 90 days. So I have my dad's pin. He gave that to me. And and then at 6 months, he ended up speaking at a meeting, and he made amends to me from the podium. He talked about this one episode where he slapped me across the face and, blah, blah, blah. And, but I remember he at some of the meetings that he would ask me to go to, he already had a commitment. He used to pick up these priests from a local sober living where the priests would go. Mm-hmm. And so I would be sitting in the back seat with Father Tom and Father Joe, and everyone was old. Like, they seemed older to me. Now, they could have been in their 40s. My father was in his 40s. Yeah, my father was 45. Everyone seemed old, and, it just seemed serious, and, it was not an attraction to me.
I'm curious, as you were sitting there processing your dad in these meetings where he was getting his medallion for 30, 60, 90 days, getting pinned, when he's in front of the room of people, essentially making amends to you from the podium, what were you thinking about your own use of alcohol and drinking at that time? Did you see yourself on a different plane than he was on, and that's why he was there and you didn't have to be there? What was your thinking at that time?
Oh, yeah, I didn't relate at all. He was the problem. And his drinking was the problem. I just was partying. That was me. I was just partying. So I didn't relate because, back then, a lot of the people were really low bottom drunks, low bottom alcoholics. It wasn't until the mid to late 70s and 80s that people started coming in younger and also co-addicted.
Sure.
Drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And so, that's, I think, I hit more of a bottom quicker because of drugs.
I've heard that over the years myself, and the years I've been around AA, and certainly in doing these interviews, and that's a very common refrain for people one of the guys I had who said that drugs just accelerated his journey to the bottom. He probably would have been an active alcoholic for many more years than he actually was because of the drugs that took him down so quickly. You mentioned earlier about drinking, smoking marijuana to get screwed up, and I think a lot of us drank and used drugs for that reason. What kind of feeling or mindset were you chasing when you were drinking and using drugs?
Well, I will tell you, my first alcoholic experience was when I was 13. And I went to what they call a block dance. And it was during the summer, 69. And my girlfriends stole alcohol. Someone stole 2 beers. Someone stole a Skippy jar filled with the, whiskey. I couldn't steal anything because my mother wouldn't let my father keep any alcohol in the house. Plus, if there was any alcohol, he would drink it all. So we didn't keep a lot of, alcohol in the house. There was so much shame, shame about my family, shame about everything. But I remember drinking that night and I hit that perfect place of feeling good, not totally drunk and fucked up, as I would say, and not there, but just there. I mean, I felt happy and I felt a part of, and I felt confident, and I started talking to this guy who was sort of like a semi-boyfriend, and he walked me home from the dance, and I remember I just felt so happy, and that's what I chased. But I don't think I ever got that place again because I always overshot the mark, and I always got to the point where I would pass out or black out or throw up, or I just overdid it. I just, wanted to be, I mean, my girlfriends and I, we used to talk about let's just get fucked up tonight. Now, they're not alcoholics.
Yeah.
I'm still friends with them, but they're not alcoholics.
Yeah, I had friends like that, too. The idea was, let's get together and get stoned and eat Cheetos and watch, reruns of I Love Lucy or something like that, or go out and go to the bars and see what we could accomplish there. Sometimes there was a frustration, though, that whenever I went too far and went past the point at which, had I just stopped there, things would have been nice and smooth and enjoyable. Did you experience that?
Oh, I did, yeah. And my friends would get very frustrated with me because I was the person who would black out, would throw up, that they would have to take care of. But the next morning, I just forgot about that. I mean, I would feel physically sick, but I just never felt like, oh, I shouldn't do that again.
Yeah.
No, I felt, well, I probably shouldn't drink vodka anymore because I started blacking out with vodka, and then I got to the point where I could have 1 or 2 drinks of vodka, and I was in a blackout.
Did you black out every time you drank over the years that you were an active alcoholic?
No.
So you had the opportunity to remember what you did the night before. So you were drinking until you were 23. And were you on the verge of getting out of nursing school by that time, or had you already gone out onto your career path?
Well, I started when I was 17 in nursing school, and I finished when I was 20. And I worked for a year in New Jersey. And I remember when I got the job, I wanted to get a daytime job so that I could go party at night and be with my friends, and I ended up getting an evening job from 3 to 11. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, maybe that's good. Maybe I won't drink so much. Maybe I won't go out and drink and party so much. And even when I was in nursing school, a lot of my friends went away to school. And I remember thinking, I'm glad I'm not going away, because I would be drunk every night. At least I had some control because I was living at home. And even though my father was drinking, everyone was concentrating on my father. They didn't look at me so much. And but when I was 20, almost 21, I moved out to California. I thought, if I could just get away. I had just gone cross country the summer of 76 for 5 weeks with my girlfriend. And we camped out every night, and we went everywhere. And I decided, I'm going to move to California. Why, I don't know, but I'm going to move. And I moved to California in September, and I had just crashed my car in August. Now, who moves to Los Angeles without a car? I drove a friend of mine that I went to high school with. She was in California, and she decided she was going to stay. So she said to me, can you drive since you're coming out, can you drive my car since you don't have a car? I said, yeah, okay. And I just came out and drove her car up to her, and then took the bus back and stayed with a friend here. And then the darkness started. I mean, I was, 30 pounds overweight, on speed. I'd gone to different doctors to get diet pills. And I always say I was the fattest speed freak. I was losing my hair so much. And
so you were keeping the weight on, even though you were taking the amphetamines.
It stopped working. It worked for a little bit, but then it stopped.
Did the alcohol help with it, or did it totally screw up whatever you were trying to accomplish with the pills?
Well, the pills worked for a little bit, and then they stopped. It was almost like, okay, these aren't working. I'm just going to continue binging and vomiting and, drinking, going to the local store and getting a gallon of Almaden white Chablis and drinking myself to sleep every night. And the funny thing is, when I moved to California, I would call my father frequently. I was very close with my father. I wasn't with my mother. I mean, I loved my mom, but she was a typical Al-Anon. I would call my dad in the evening. And I would call him when I knew my mother couldn't answer the phone. And so it had to be like 12 or 1 in the morning, because if anyone called, he was the one who picked it up at that point. And he would talk to me, and I'm so depressed. I hate it out here. I don't know why I moved. I don't know what I'm doing. And my dad just said, you're there, just stay there and try and make a life for yourself. And then he would go on and say, I picked up a little newcomer, Pat, and I took him to a meeting, and he's doing really well. And I thought to myself, he's always talking about himself. Why is he talking to me about this, And, but he would always talk. I went to a meeting the other night, and God, I really felt good after. And he would just talk to me about AA. He never said to me, you're an alcoholic, but he knew I was an alcoholic.
Later on in your recovery, when you and your dad were able to get back together, did he ever give you an idea of what he was thinking as he was saying that to you in the earlier years?
Well, he kept thinking that if he could just carry the message to me. He knew he couldn't carry the alcoholic, but if he could just tell me how AA has helped him, maybe I might. Because telling me that I'm an alcoholic was not going to help me. I was just going to be more defensive and, defiant is the word. But he used to say, the only thing I could do is carry the message to you and let you know how AA has changed my life. And that's why I didn't say anything to you about how AA could change your life. Could that have helped me at that point? Possibly. But I was partying. And then I moved out in September. My best friend moved out in June, and she's not an alcoholic. She's still out here, but she's a party girl. And then a bunch of people from my hometown, from New Jersey, moved out. Everything I tried to run away from ended up out here.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA Recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. So that geographic cure didn't really work very well, did it?
No. And all my Bergenfield friends were out here. I ended up rooming with my girlfriend, so therefore I had no control over who could come in and who could stay overnight. And my life was so out of control. I just wanted to try and control it, but I couldn't. I was still working. I was working per diem.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I worked for about a year at UCLA on the orthopedic floor, but they kept sticking me. I didn't know how to stick up for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and they kept sticking me on nights because I was young and because I was new. Finally, I just said, I just can't work nights anymore. But it was during that time I had a crush on one of the interns.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at an orthopedic party at one of the dorms. And I guess I thought I was Errol Flynn or something, but I was on a balcony on the second floor. And I got over the balcony railing and I called to him, Kevin, and it was such a good looking guy. And I said, Kevin, catch me. And all these orthopedic doctors looked at me like, no. Anyway, they brought me over the railing, but I just remember that next morning going into work and thinking, I can't believe, no one said anything to me. But then I found a nurse friend. This is that last year. We would go out after my 3 to 11 shift, and we would go to this place in Santa Monica called the Orr House. Now, if anyone is a drunk and gets sober, they've been to the Orr House.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not Whore House, it's OAR, Orr House, right by the beach. It was the alcoholic paradise. I would get beer spilled on me. And I remember that was the last year. I remember thinking the girl I was with had a problem with alcohol. And then I remember thinking, wow, why are you going here? But that left me like really quickly.
So you were going there during the days because you couldn't go out at night, and you were going there with your friend who you thought she was the alcoholic and not you. What finally brought you to the realization that you were an alcoholic, and what did the entree into AA look like for you?
Well, I think it started piecemeal, and it didn't even start with the drunk driving arrest in October. It started with that Monday night going home, pouring my Amo Demonstrably, lighting my joint, and then the words came out of my mouth, instead of fruit, can I have alcohol? Wow. And then she said, why don't you go to AA, meet me tomorrow? And I just said yes. I honestly think the grace of God, and I had been praying to God. I'd been reading the Bible. I'd been praying to God, please help me. I always think of Chuck C., when I talk about this, because he always said that towards the end, he felt like a failure. He was a failure at life. And that's how I felt. I was a failure at life. And I went to that meeting and I identified. And that's why people telling their stories is so important. Not quoting the big book, not giving advice. It's one drunk talking to another. It's telling our stories and being able to identify, wow, I think I may be one of you.
Did you feel that way from the beginning, from the first meeting on, or was there a period of time where you were identifying more with the differences than the similarities, or had you finally resigned yourself to the fact that you need to be going to AA?
Well, I knew I needed to be going to AA and OA. I knew that there was a problem with me. I didn't know what the problem was. And when I talked with my dad when I was 15 days sober on the phone, I said to him, Daddy, I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic, but I've been going to meetings every night. And he said, honey, you don't have to know if you're an alcoholic. Just know that your father's an alcoholic. Your grandparents were alcoholic. Your grandmother wanted to be buried with a pint of whiskey. Your uncle is an alcoholic on Skid Row. Your other uncle is in a mental institution. So this alcoholism runs in the family. And he said, and you may have it. You may not be coming in as late as I did, but you don't have to wait that long. And that's when I remember reading the book, about how some of us were just potential alcoholics and we didn't have to take the elevator all the way down, that we could stop there. But the longer I'm sober, the more, like, I used to think, well, I was a potential alcoholic. No, I was an alcoholic. And the longer I'm sober, the more has been revealed to me about my alcoholism and drugs and all of that. But it took me about 9 months to really fully concede to my innermost self. I got a sponsor, but she only had a month more than me. So it didn't make any sense. We were two people that developed crushes on two different guys, and we followed them around. And I'm grateful that Jerry had 3 years, my crush, because he went to meetings like 8 meetings a week. And so I just followed him. But I remember going back east when I was 3 months sober, and I went to meetings with my dad. And I remember going out with my girlfriends in the city, and they said to me, "So you're never going to drink ever?" And I said, "Well, not right now." But I just kept coming. I kept relating. I kept identifying. And I felt better coming to the meetings. And when I was 30 days sober, I worked evenings. So there was a meeting, and not many people attended, but they needed someone to be secretary. And they said, "Why don't you be?" I said, "Well, I only have 30 days. That's okay." And it was a big book study and 12 and 12 study. And that's how I got to know the big book the first year, is by going to this big book study and reading from the 12 and 12. But when I had 9 months sober, I had a friend come out to visit me, and we went traveling, and I was still going to meetings, but we went traveling for about a week. And during that time, I never went to a meeting, and I was never in contact with anyone and not accountable to anyone. And during that time, she said, "Let's go to some of these wineries." And I was so uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't know, like, if I had talked with an old timer, they would have said, "No, you're not going to a winery. You have no business in a winery." But I went with my girlfriend, and as she was doing her thing in the winery, I sat there and I went through 4 packs of gum. And she said to me, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "I feel really uncomfortable. I don't think I should be here." And anyway, when I got back, she had left, and I ended up at a meeting on a Friday. It was a women's meeting. And there was this woman, Mary M., sober now and in the group. And she was speaking, and she was Irish. She looked like my mother. And I said, "Can you be my sponsor?" And that's when I really started to work the steps, be accountable to someone, stay in touch with the sponsor, learn that I needed a home group, and that I needed to show up for a home group, and I needed a commitment at a home group, and that, at 1 year I should start doing work at hospitals and institutions, which I did. And I remember going downtown. I had this panel for about 17 years, and it was Skid Row. And I remember saying to Mary, "I don't identify with these people." And she said, "It doesn't matter. You are just bringing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to them. You're bringing the message of hope. You're sharing your experience." And, we used to have to bring people to speak, bring a couple of speakers with us. And also during this time, whenever I would go back east, my first thing my sponsor said to me is, "When you go somewhere and you travel, the first thing you do is you call Alcoholics Anonymous, Northern New Jersey, and you get in touch with someone, and you find out where a meeting is. That's your first connection when you land." Even though my father was sober, but at the time I wanted my own sobriety. I didn't want to, because my father is blustery and he's got a big personality, but she taught me a lot. She taught me the basics of AA. She was my sponsor for about 3 years. And that's when I got my sponsor, Kathleen, who's my sponsor today. And I went through the steps again with Kathleen. Because still at that point I thought, well, maybe I was too young. Maybe I was young. And so, we did a first step again. We did step one again. I wrote down my drinking and alcohol, drug addicted history, and she was, no, you're an alcoholic. Yeah.
Isn't it funny how even after 3 years of working with a woman who had a really strong foundation in AA, that after 3 years of that kind of sobriety, you'd still think, well, maybe I'm a little bit too young for this, or maybe I could go and have a drink or something like that. Doesn't that sound crazy to you?
Oh, it does. And that's the thing. I always say, we alcoholics are the last to know that we are alcoholics. And that's why I used to go to this meeting. They have a AA countdown, who has 1 year, 1 year stands up, who has, 3 years, 5 years. And I remember this guy saying to me, now look, after 5 years, who has 5 years? Who has 10 years? See how many people are standing. Now look and see how many people are standing at 15 and 20. I think I could easily have talked myself out of Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's our alcoholism. Our alcoholism says we're not an alcoholic. We don't have a problem. Oh, I think maybe, we use all of these excuses. For me, they were excuses. Once I was able to do the steps again, I wouldn't have lasted alone out there. I couldn't do life by myself
without AA.
Yeah, or anything. I had to learn the basics. I had to learn to show up on time at work. I was there to be of service. That my sponsor Kathleen was very close with Chuck C, and she said, "We're drunks helping drunks. We're one of God's kids, and we're here to help God's kids." And then she taught me, you need to go and get your teeth cleaned. When was the last time you did your teeth? And I had crooked teeth, and I said, I always wanted braces. You can have braces. Go find out how basic things like that. Like, oh my God, I just got a ticket because I ran a red light. Well, we don't run red lights here. We stop at stop signs too. And I had to learn to be accountable in my car.
Yeah.
Because I'm still struggled with alcoholic emotions. And it came out in my car, at my job. During this time, when I was about a year sober, I went to therapy. And the therapist I had, it was a group therapy. And she was about 30 years sober at the time. So the therapy that we had was all based, like she would say to me, I think you need to start working on 6 and 7 here. It was all based on the program. It was when I was 1 year sober. And this is where I love this part in, I think it's We Agnostics, where it says attendance at a few meetings and reading a little bit of the big book is a far cry from purposeful and contented sobriety. This is the difference that Clancy talks about, that people that are just heavy drinkers can come in and they stop drinking, but their life doesn't fall apart. We alcoholics, we come in, and that's when our life starts to fall apart, because we have to deal with things that we never dealt with because we drank over them. But I was in therapy with her for 5 years, and I tell you, she taught me so much.
That first 5 years then became an incredible foundation for what's been almost 4.5 decades of sobriety. And that's a long time. But that's when most of the stuff happens that, were you not sober, you wouldn't get through. Or the great gifts are given, which you wouldn't have experienced had you not stayed sober. I wanted to ask you about some of those things. What were some of the main milestones during your 43 years of sobriety that you could look back on and say, yeah, that was the program at work for me. That was God at work for me. Do you have some of these things that stick out in your mind?
Yeah. Well, one, my first 7 years, I was really active. I had an H&I panel.
What's H&I?
Hospital and institution. I was part of a home group that we used to have Christmas shows. And so we used to put on Christmas shows and for alcoholics. And that started when I was 2 years sober. And I thank God, because I remember my first year, I went back right before I turned 1. I went back for Christmas, which was not a good move. And I learned that don't be around your family at Christmas time. One, my father is out at meetings. My mother hates him because he's at meetings.
So she didn't support him in his program, did she?
At first, but then, she didn't want to live in AA meetings, and my father had to. He had to live in AA meetings. But then you go back and you really see the sickness of alcoholism. And I remember thinking to myself, I will never go back to Christmas again. And I never did. Never did. I would always go back at Thanksgiving. I remember thinking I had to keep my visits short. But I also had to do major work on my relationship with my mother, because my mother, the relationship was so not great. I mean, I loved her, but I resented her, and she was the problem. Not my father and not his drinking. It was my mother. If she wasn't the way she was, my father wouldn't have drank so much, and that's the craziness.
Families can become those triggers, especially early on in sobriety. I always tell guys I sponsor, make sure you have your own car wherever you go. Make sure you have an exit strategy. Make sure you've got a meeting in the location where you're going to be able to go to, and make sure you call me every day while you're there. And most of them have gotten through those family things, although it's tough to watch.
Well, that's the thing. I had to limit how much time I spent with them. But also the big thing that was hard for me is I was 23 years old. I was young. And all my friends, my Jersey friends, still drank and smoked and did drugs. It was hard. I would go back and I wanted to see my friends so much. And, sometimes I remember going to one party and my friend said, "What are you drinking?" "Chamomile tea." But I had to limit the time that I could spend, which made me feel very alienated from the love that I had with these people. But I had to limit the time. And I went on a date and I was about a year sober. And when I came home, we opened the front door and my roommate's brother was in the living room snorting coke from the table. And the date that I had looked at me and he said, "You have no business being here." So that was a big thing. And then I talked with my sponsor. "Yeah, you have to move. You can't be in a place like that." So I had to move. And that was a big thing, to separate myself from my friends a little bit. That was really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard. But I also realized that the people that heard me as a person and listened to me and loved me unconditionally were the people in the program. And I had to develop a family, and that part of that family was my home group, where we used to say, "Where the debris meets the sea." Our motto was, "Work the steps or die, motherfuckers." Sorry, I hate to curse, but that was our motto. But I did go a little crazy when I was 7 years sober. I fired my sponsor because I wasn't getting well. And I got back into my eating disorder for a year, and I went through a difficult time and depressed. And I went through that dark night of the soul that a lot of people go through in AA, where we either drink or we find the light. I started back in therapy, and I got myself another sponsor. And also at that time, I remember, I went to meetings and I would say, "Is this all there is?" I remember talking to my dad, and he said, "Pat, AA is a bridge back to life. We don't have to live in AA all the time. You're young. Get out there." And I remember talking to my sponsor about it, and she said, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I've always wanted to go to Europe. I've always wanted to go to Ireland and see my family." And she said, "Well, why don't you?" And I said, "Well, because I'm depressed." And she said, "Well, you may be depressed the rest of your life." She said, "You can't let that stop you." And she said, "So let's get your passport. Let's do this." And I just took these baby steps. And I mean, I was scared the whole time I did this, but I ended up going to Europe for 5 weeks. I went to Germany. I had cousins that were staying there and teaching. So I had people there that I knew. I had a doctor that I worked with. He went back to Yugoslavia with his family. So I got to stay with his family in Yugoslavia. But I got to go to meetings everywhere I went, because I learned the minute I touch down, I make a call. "Hi, Munich, where's your meetings? And I got to meet people in Rome at meetings, and then I ended up going to Ireland. And it just so happened that my father's side of the family was having a reunion. And by then I was 10, 11 years sober. And being around people that drank didn't bother me. I could enjoy myself, and because I sort of knew who I was more, and I felt comfortable, and believe me, there was a lot of drinking, but there was also one girl who came who said she left treatment early so she could come. So it just reminded me that alcoholism runs deep in my Irish family. I was scared the whole time. And I also had lost sort of contact with God, but I kept doing the things that I learned early on, which was I read my little spiritual books in the morning, and I ask God to help me through the day. And I learned that from my dad. My dad used to say, when you get up, you just say, please, God. God knows the rest. And at night, you just say, thank you. But I will say, when I was 5 years sober, there was a woman who had 15 years. She had taken a 15-year cake. And I remember saying to her, Cindy, I can't believe 15 years. How do you feel about your character defects? And she said, I just feel a lot more comfortable with them. They're not gone. I just feel a lot more comfortable. And I remember thinking, wow, because for my whole sobriety until maybe 15 years, I used to beat myself up all the time for little things. If I said something wrong at an AA meeting, or if I didn't give the best pitch, and when I was 15 years sober, I finally realized, wow, that is self-obsession. And that is alcoholism. Now, during this time, I was also going to Al-Anon, and I've gone to Al-Anon my whole sobriety on and off. But it was during this time that between 10 and 20 years, that it all seemed to come together, and I felt okay being me. It took a long time.
A lot of people wonder whether and when that's going to happen. And I think one of the difficulties that I've experienced within that period of time is that we claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. But yet, as we're moving along in our sobriety, that part of me that still wants to do everything perfectly applies to the program too. And the minute I don't do something perfectly, if I don't say the right thing to the guy's sponsor, or if I don't say the right thing, the minute I find myself thinking about what I've said in a meeting and worrying that I said the wrong thing, I'm on that path towards wanting perfection, and anything less makes me upset or bums me out. And so I get what you're talking about there. Mm-hmm. So this is all a spiritual journey for you between 10 and 20 years.
Well, and during this whole time, I stopped going to Catholic church, and I started going to Unity Church, and I was introduced to my daily word, which I've had for 43 years, and I read. And at 1 year, Mary M. gave me Emmett Fox. Mary had told me, you start reading these spiritual books because this is a spiritual program. And she gave me Around the World with Emmett Fox. And it's a daily thing of Emmett Fox, and got a guru. I started, I used to go listen to Krishnamurti. I used to go listen to Ram Dass. And I just went and did all these things because I knew that it was it was God as I understand God that was going to help me get through. And it was during 10 to 20 that I realized also that this perfection of what I think I should do is so connected with the third step. If I've turned my will and my life over to God, then what I'm saying today is God inspired. It's not me. And if I turn my will and my life over to God, then I was supposed to have 17 years with the love of my life. And then he passed, and things happened, and I had to sell my house this past year. I've been on crutches for 2.5 years. It's not been easy, but the things that I learned early on, take care of your alcoholism and everything else will take care of itself. So that when I'm in a difficult headspace, I remember that. And that means using these spiritual tools that I didn't know were spiritual tools. I just thought that they were call another person, go to a meeting, say a prayer, read the big book. I was talking to a girl I sponsor, and she was really having a hard time this week. And I was telling her how when I sold my home of 23 years that I shared with my late husband, and I said, it was so difficult. And I said to her, I had to use every tool in the toolbox. I was calling my sponsor. I just had to do whatever I could. I had to pray like I'd never prayed before. And the thing that I learned also between 10 and 20, there are times in our sobriety when we have to recommit ourselves to this program.
Yeah, I believe that.
So like when I was, 11 years sober, and I just like, I'm so tired of listening to these people, and I can't stand this meeting. I remember thinking to myself, you put your ass on your hands and you sit in that seat and you just listen until you start to feel like you want to be here and get a commitment at the meeting, which I did.
Isn't it amazing? You knew what to do because you were hanging around the middle of the program. I think what happens over the years is that we stay involved in the middle of the program. We know that's where we need to be, but sometimes we start backing away from the middle, but we're going to enough meetings and working the program hard enough to know we better tie off a rope in the middle there as we're backing up so that we can pull ourselves back in. I've seen too many people start to take their sobriety for granted. Like, I don't like this meeting, but it's okay that I don't go because I go to X number of meetings, and then there's another meeting they feel that way in, and before long, they're going to 1 or 2 meetings a week. And I have to ask them, what was there that you were telling me about the importance of going to 4 meetings a week that still applies to you only going to 2 meetings a week?
Well, and I think also for me, and I learned this early on too from some of my spiritual giant women that had time when I was new, because I found that I would maybe not go to that meeting, maybe not go to when I didn't feel good, when I felt like I'm fucked up, my world is falling apart, I'm 16 years sober, I'm depressed, what am I going to do, blah, 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 blah. And it's at those times that we need to show up. And that's hard for us alcoholics, but I have to always think of, I can't save my ass and my face at the same time. I have to show up, and I have to tell people when things are hard, because they need to hear that we all still struggle. This one guy, Mike, he used to say, we never rise above being human.
That's such a powerful way to think, too, that when things are going badly, we need to be in meetings to be the example of how to get through things going badly and stay sober. The flip side of that is also true, isn't it? Where I better be going to meetings when things are going very, very well to show people that if I stay sober, I can live a life in which things go well. I think what I've noticed over the years is more people slip when things are going really well for them. They start thinking they're running the show again, and suddenly their lives become so important and busy that their sobriety slips down a few pegs. And then it's not long before they're going to 1 meeting a month or hardly going at all. And they're moving further and further towards the edge of the cliff, but the ground still feels solid under their feet, but they're moving away from the herd. So when I hear you say about redoubling when tragic things, and I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your husband at that time, but the fact that you got through it, man, what an incredible gift to the people who were there to share those meetings with you.
Well, when I met my husband, I recommitted when I was about 11 years sober. All my friends that were part of my home group in my first 10 years, a lot of them had moved. So the meeting was totally different. And I didn't feel comfortable. And I thought, I need to find a new home group. And so I started going to this meeting up in the Palisades, and, I became a greeter because that's what you do. You get a commitment. And then I, did literature, and then I did the coffee or this and that. And eventually, when I was 19 years sober, I was secretary. It was a year commitment. And I had my dad come out to give the last talk. And my dad gave the last talk, and I had just turned 20 years sober, and I did a party. There were about 100 people there, and my dad was there, and it just was so good. And I remember running into my old sponsor Kathleen, and she used to say to me, Patrice, you are so serious, you have a hard time having fun.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was 20 years sober, dancing at my 20th birthday party with Kathleen, and I said, Kath, I know how to have fun. I know how to feel it. I don't have to act as if I'm having fun. I can feel that. But that's when I met my husband. I asked him to speak. I saw him at a meeting and I asked him to speak, and I had never had a long relationship. So for people that are out there that, you have dreams and you want to meet someone, you want to get married, you want to have children, you want to do things, between 10 and 20 years of sobriety, I'm never going to meet someone. And my sponsor would always say, continue trying to be the person that you would like to meet. Continue trying to better yourself so that when it's time, you will meet the right person. And that's what I did. I met the right person. He was in the program, and he started a meeting at his bedside when he had a liver transplant back in 1991. But we met in 98 and we got married in 2000, and my father and him became really good friends. He used to say, your dad's my sponsor now. And I would say, oh, okay, whatever. But we would, our favorite thing to do was to go back 2, 3, 4 times a year and just spend 4 days there and take my dad to meetings, because by then he was in a wheelchair. And even then, even in a wheelchair, he had a big book study in his house, and he would wheel himself back and fix the coffee and then wheel himself forward. And he knew that service and working the steps were the things that keep us going.
God, that's beautiful. Just to hear that reaffirmation of staying sober till the end and how important that can be to the people around you and what an impact it can have. I had the opportunity to be amongst a small group of men who were doing bedside meetings for a good friend of ours who died of liver cancer. And, he was one of those guys from the 60s who got the hepatitis, who was a heroin user, but he was also sober close to 40 years when he died. But those meetings were so powerful because we saw a man on his way out still clinging to the importance of staying sober. And nobody would have given him a drink then if he wanted it, but it was just that commitment that went right up to his final days. It was a beautiful thing to behold.
Well, we had an AA house. He used to have a men's meeting in the back on Sunday nights. And then the meeting that he started at his bedside still went on. It's going to be, he had his liver transplant April 17th. So it'll be, 91 to 2022. So that's 31 years. I always wanted to have children. And that in my 30s, that was hard because I just would cry to my sponsor, I'm never going to meet anyone. I'm never going to have kids. And, I was never able to, I didn't meet the right person till I was 42. And at that point, I didn't want to have children at that age. And he had children and I had grandchildren. And I'm very close with my daughter, my stepdaughter. And I'm very close with my grandson, one of my grandsons. And so I may not have gotten what I want, but I did get what I needed.
And those are incredibly God-given and God-identified gifts, aren't they? That I can see God at work in my life as I look around at just about everything, including things like what you're saying. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just as you're talking about the grandkids and tying it all back to that point at which you knew that you needed some help and that you couldn't do it by yourself. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, isn't it?
Well, and I look back over my life, and I honestly, the thing that comes to mind is God has done for me what I could never do for myself. Never. Not without the program, not without a sponsor, not without going to meetings, not without getting on my knees, not without spiritual. I mean, when my husband died, people picked me up and took me to meetings. My AA friends brought me food. I remember at 6 months saying to my sponsor, Kathleen, saying, I can't believe it. I'm like a newcomer. I'm back to meetings every day.
Yeah.
I was going to meetings every day. But what happened is, after losing my husband, I had this little pamphlet that was in my dad's big book. It had the 3rd step prayer, the 7, like sort of opened into a accordion, and it had the promises. And I felt so hopeless and helpless, just like I did when I was new. When you become one in a relationship, it's heartbreaking. And what I did is I started reading the promises every day, that I would know a new freedom and a new happiness, that I would not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it, that I would comprehend the word serenity, and I would know peace no matter how far down the scale I would go. I could see how my experience could help others. 7 months after my husband passed, a dear friend of mine's husband passed. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, I don't think I could go to another service. But my next thought was, you have to go. You have to show her that it's okay, that she'll survive. And 2 weeks after her husband died, husband of 48 years, she called me just sobbing. And she said, I don't know. I feel like a newcomer. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I said, Dorothy, why don't you read the promises every day? Because that helped me so much to know, as alcoholics in Alcoholics Anonymous, we always need to feel that there is hope. Hope for the next day, hope to feel better, hope to just hope, and that there's help. And I know that helped her to read the promises every day.
That's amazing. Because
there are dark times in sobriety. There are difficult times in sobriety. The dark night of the soul does come back sometimes.
Yeah, it does.
And we have to use all those tools that we've been given to help us get through that.
We do. We do.
And we do.
And what you've said today, and it's amazing, that's why I love doing these interviews. They're so meaningful and deep. And what you've just said, it just touches a part of my heart that I can really identify with, because I've had those kind of tragedies that have been very difficult. And had I not cultivated the relationships that I had over the years of my involvement with AA, I don't know that I would have gotten through them. And every single thing that I was doing on a daily basis, the going to meetings, the praying, the reading the big book, the working with others, and working the steps, I don't know which of those things, had I not been doing it, I would have not made it. So it's amazing to hear you talk about such hope in the face of tragedy, but such overall acknowledgement that no matter how things go, good, bad, or otherwise, that we can stay sober, we can stay happy and content. Sounds to me like you're that happy, content person today, even though you've got your challenges.
We can.
Am I right?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. They always used to say, to be able to live with unresolved problems in Alcoholics Anonymous is the challenge for us alcoholics. And it's the challenge for me. But the minute, I've been on crutches for 2.5 years. And the minute the pandemic hit, my friend and I started these women's meetings. So even though I was on crutches, I had to have surgery. I was in pain. I needed a nurse. A nurse needs a nurse. Go figure. I was busy. I had to get speakers. I had to get leaders.
Well, you've gotten some great ones for the meetings that you and I go to together. I know that you and Frank have many, many years of knowing many, many people.
Yeah.
I will say that people you got for that particular meeting have just been brilliant in their shares, and I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for doing this interview today.
You're welcome.
This is I feel like I've gotten to know you in a way that listening to 3 to 5 minute shares, it would take me a long, long time. And you're a beautiful person, and I love you, and this has made my whole day. I want to thank you for doing this, and all the things that you said about the way you worked your program, I think are going to be very important for whoever listens to this. And people are listening to these podcasts all over the world. I don't know when your message is going to touch somebody or in what way, but I'm pretty certain that it will. Thanks so much, Patrice.
Thank you, Howard.
I'm so glad we had a chance to do this today.
Me too.
Well, my friends, that's it for this episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Patrice T, for sharing her story, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? And also leave a review and rating for the show on your podcast app. That'll help others find us. As the number of worldwide listeners grows, this podcast will be of greater help to more and more people. Of course, you can listen to any or all of my other 70-plus interviews on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to listen to every interview, share your comments, and also contact us. If you want to email me directly, it's Howard at aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, no advertising is allowed, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.